Welcome everyone to DED's Payment Process Revision Training. I'm Jennifer Zarek. I'm the Chief Data Officer at DED. Also co-host with me this morning is Whitney Schumacher. So today we are doing the second of two trainings on DED's new payment process revision. Essentially, there's been some system updates to the payment process, and then there's also some new business process requirements that DED has changed. So to get started, today we're going to cover a summary of the changes and their effective dates. We'll also go through an overview of the new process in slides, and then we will do an in-system demo as well. So the changes that have been made to our payment process are going to be effective July 1st of 2022. On July 1st, they become required. However, you are allowed to start using them immediately if you find that they're easier for you, which we think they will be. So the first major change is that we are no longer going to use reporting periods. Instead of reporting periods, expenses will be attached to the payment requests using a date range. This eliminates steps in your process and gives you better visibility into what's included on the payment request itself. Those are two system enhancements that we're taking advantage of. The third change is a DED business process change in our standard operating procedures. And that is that we are now requiring you to create one expense per supporting document and proof of payment. So in the past, we've allowed you to lump invoices together, so submit multiple invoices on one expense. That is no longer allowed. If we see that on a payment request, we will have to reject it. The purpose of this change is to improve record keeping. It will simplify the monitoring process and better prepare both you and DED for audits. So I kind of touched on these already, but the advantages of the new process, getting rid of the reporting periods, will eliminate steps in the process. I'm going to pause for a moment. It looks like we're having some audio issues. I'll let Whitney respond into the chat to those of you who had questions about that. So back to the advantages of the new process. Getting rid of the reporting periods eliminates steps for you. It also gives you better visibility into what expenses are included in the payment request. The third benefit is that it's much easier to edit if you make mistakes or if a request is rejected. If you find a mistake before you submit the payment request, you no longer have to reach out to DED to get it fixed. And if it's rejected, it's also a simpler process for you to make changes to it. So we're going to kind of do like a visual overview of the process as it is right now. So what we have been doing on reimbursement requests is you create expenses, you review those expenses, and then in the past, you would create a budget reporting period, close that reporting period, and then mark the budget tracking period task as complete. Those last three steps have now been eliminated. Instead, after you review expenses, you can go directly to creating your reimbursement request. Or if you're a program that requires the request for funds form, you can do that first and then create your reimbursement request. You'll attach the expenses directly on the reimbursement request itself using a date range. And then you will submit the reimbursement payment request to DED. This last task, complete payment request source documentation tracker, that applies to CDBG, home, and the National Housing Trust Fund, nothing has changed with that process either. This PowerPoint is available. It's on our website along with all the training materials. We'll have a link to that at the end of the slides. Whitney, if you could put that in the chat, that would be great too. So here's the first change that we discussed in getting rid of the reporting periods. When you create an expense, you'll still mark it as reviewed, and then you'll use the dates on the expense to pull it into the payment request. So this part hasn't changed, but I just want to highlight it's still important to mark the expense status as reviewed. And then the real change comes when you create the reimbursement payment request itself. So we used to always have to attach a reporting period. Now you never need to attach a reporting period. Instead, you can use this expenses from range to select the dates of your eligible expenses. The other things have not changed on the payment request. The payment type is still reimbursement. We still should not see an adjusted match amount. You should also not edit any of these cost fields. All of these costs and contributions will populate from the expenses in the date range that you selected. And finally, the net total should equal the requested amount. If your costs or your match aren't what you expect them to be, or the net total isn't what you want it to be, then you have a mistake in your expenses that needs to be corrected before you submit the payment request. This is specifically for a reimbursement payment request. There's a few programs we have that use advances like CCCFS. In that case, there's been no change to that advance request process. So, at this point, we're going to jump to the demo, and I want to kind of just set it up for you before we go into it. So you can have these slides up as I'm going through the demo in the system to give you a reference point to what we're looking at. We are going to look at a grant that already has one approved payment request on it. So what we're going to do today is submit payment request 2. And on payment request 2, I have 2 expenses that I want to include. I have an April 2022 payroll report. It's going to be in my general administration budget category, and my total cost on that is $2,500. When I enter this expense, I'm going to make a mistake. This is just to demonstrate to you how you can edit those mistakes before you submit a payment request. The second expense that I'm going to do is invoice 2A-154 from Smith Construction. The total cost there is $23,000, and it's going to be in my construction category. So my total expenses are going to be totaled to $25,500. Of that, $12,750 are grant funds. So in this scenario, I have a 50% match. I'm also going to create an expense for invoice 1478. In my hypothetical example here, I have my supporting document for this invoice, but I haven't paid it yet. So I'm waiting until I get proof of payment to submit it to DED, but I am going to go ahead and create the expense so you can see how you can kind of work ahead on your grant and how you can keep expenses out of the payment request if you aren't ready to submit them yet. So again, I would recommend using the link Whitney put in the chat to pull these slides up to keep it as a reference point for yourself as we're going through the example in the system. So now I am going to jump to the in-system demo. And just as a reminder, as we go through this presentation, please use the chat or the Q&A by hitting the 3 ellipses in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to get to the QA to ask questions. If you would like to ask your question verbally, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. or request us to unmute you in the chat, whatever's easiest for you. Are there any questions at this point before we go into the demo? Okay, so we're going to jump into Amplifund. So here's my award. It's called DED Recipient Training Demo. If you see that throughout, that's the award name. You can see that I've already invoiced $22,000 here. So I am going to create.
Jennifer, we can't see your Amplifund screen anymore. We just see your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second here. Sorry about that.
Jennifer, you're still muted too.
Sorry, I apologize for the technical difficulties. Quick summary, my award's called DED Recipient Training Demo. So don't let that throw you off if you see that throughout the process. I've already had one invoice approved for $10,000. So I'm going to go ahead and start creating my payment request 2. To do that, I start like we always have by going to my expense screen. So I'm clicking on Post Award, Financial, and then Expenses. And as a quick reminder how this expense grid works, if you click Run, you'll see all the expenses submitted on your grant. You could also select a specific budget category before clicking Run. I want to see everything that I've already submitted. So you can see these 2 closed expenses are from my first payment request. So I'm going to go ahead and create my new expenses. To do that, I click the green plus sign. And the first one I'm going to create is my April 2022 payroll. So this expense should actually be for $2,500, but this is the one that I'm going to make an error on. So I'm actually going to just make it for $1,500 instead. So we can pretend that I made a typo here on accident. My invoice is dated on 4/29, so that's the date of the expense that I'm going to use. This is a common question we get, so your expense date should match the date on your supporting documentation. The expense status is always going to be reviewed if you want it to pull into your payment request. These payee fields are optional. You can use them if you want to keep track of your vendors. I'm not going to cover that today, but we have some written instructions on that if you'd like to use that functionality. And then you should always fill out the description box. The description should be something that is meaningful to you, that describes the expense and the invoice you're creating. This helps you create kind of an audit trail as you're looking back through your expenses if you ever need to find something specific. So I'm going to call this April 2022 payroll. Then I'm going to go to the Financials tab. This is where I specify if I have any match. I do. In this case, I'm matching $500. So I'm going to toggle to the dollar button. You should always toggle to the dollar button and enter in the exact dollar amount that you are matching. If you have a situation where you have odd numbers, remember that money always rounds up. So you should enter in, the number of cents, probably round it up in match if you needed to split grant funds and match unevenly. Always need to round to a whole penny. If I click outside of the box, anywhere in this white space, it changes these calculations and I can see what I've entered, $500 match. And then on the attachments, I'm going to attach both my source document and my proof of payment. To do that, I click the Choose Files button. And using the File Explorer, I navigate to whatever folder I have my source documentation saved in. So I'm looking for the 2022 payroll report and my proof of payment. If I want to select two files at the same time, I can hold the Control key on my keyboard and then click the second file and then click Open. You could have also attached those individually by just clicking the Choose Files twice. So once I see them both listed here, I can click Create. So I see my expense come in as reviewed with the date that matches the invoice and a specific description. I still have an edit pencil here if I need to change anything. I'm going to go ahead and create my second expense by clicking the green plus. And in this one, it's a construction category. And my direct cost is $23,000. My invoice is dated April 14th. So that's my expense date, the date that matches my invoice. I want this to pull into my payment request, so it's always going to be in a review status. Again, I want to put in a specific description. So this is invoice 2A154. And then it's also from Smith Construction. So I'm just going to put the vendor name here too. And then on the Financials tab, I'm going to do my cash match. In this case, I'm matching $12,500. I clicked in the white space to see that the grant funds came to $10,500 for a total of $23,000. I'm going to do the same thing at the attachments. Choose Files. It'll bring up my File Explorer. I'm looking for the Smith Construction invoice. I'm going to attach that. If I have a second proof of payment, which I should, I'm going to attach that here. So notice that I'm creating one expense per invoice. I did not put both of these invoices on the same expense. That is now a requirement. Again, I'm going to click Create. So those are the two expenses that are included in my payment request too. However, I have a third invoice and I'd like to just work ahead on my grant a little bit and create the expense for that invoice as well. But I don't want this included in my second payment request because I haven't actually paid it yet. So this is, again, a construction invoice, and the total cost on it is $4,000. It is dated April 26th, so I'm matching my expense date for the invoice date. I do not want this to pull into my payment request, so I'm going to leave the expense status at new. And again, I'm going to give it a description so I know what invoice it is. In this case, it's invoice 1478 from We Are Engineers. On the Financials tab, I'm going to do my match. I'm toggling the dollar button on. My match is $1,000 on this invoice. And then I do have an attachment. I don't have my proof of payment, but I have my source documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and attach the invoice itself. And at this point, I'm going to click Create. So I have this in the system now for when I do have proof of payment. I can come back in here and click the Edit pencil. And then at that time, I would just add my other attachment. Since we have all of recipients from all different grant programs on the phone, I do want to point out that some programs may have a custom tab on the expenses. An example would be CDBG, Home, or the National Housing Trust Fund, and you use those custom tabs to specify whether or not your expense has program income or revolving loan fund, and also to provide information on whether or not you've attached your proof of payment. So that custom tab will still be there for you. It's still required. We just aren't doing it in this example. Okay, so at this point, I'm ready to review my expenses. There's a couple different ways that I can do that. I can review them from this screen. Looks like we have a question in the chat. If an expense is paid using both program income and grant funds, can this be done? Yes. Your user guides will contain specific details on that, but as a quick summary, program income is not included in the direct costs or the grant funds. So it would not be included in this field or in the match. It will only be included on the custom tab. So that process has not changed from what we've been doing. Are there any other questions at this point? Okay. So like I was saying, I can review my expenses from this screen, or I can use some of the reports in the system to review expenses. To find those, I go to Reports, Post Award, and the two that you probably want to use are the grant budget variance and the expense detail. I'm going to open these in new tabs by right-clicking on them and opening the link in a new tab. So the grant budget variance is going to show you kind of an overall view of your award, what you were budgeted in specific budget categories and what you've spent. There's always filters on the right-hand side. So I'm going to select my award name. And then I can see how much was budgeted in construction and then how much I've entered in expenses in that category. So it shows me the variance of what's remaining on my report, on my grant to draw down. The grant expense detail works in a similar way. I select my grant on the filters on the right-hand side. And what this report is going to show me is really similar to the expense grid. So it's going to show me every expense that I've entered and the amount. You can export either of these reports by using these buttons up here. That's another way to review your expenses. So after you've reviewed your expenses, you can go ahead and create the reimbursement request. So to do that, you go to Post Award, Cash Flow, and then Payment Requests. So you can see here's my approved payment request. And now I want to create a new one. To do that, I click the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner. I name it sequentially. So it's my payment request. I've had one approved payment request, so this is my second one. I'm creating it today. I no longer have to attach reporting periods. Instead, I'm going to use this expense date range. So if I go back to my expenses, the ones that I want to include go from April 14th to April 29th. So I'm going to make sure that I include those dates here. I can start right on the 14th. I could go a little before if I wanted. I could go through the end of April. Doesn't matter as long as this range includes the dates from my expenses. Notice when I filled those in, these numbers populated down here. Let's also take a closer look at these numbers. So the net costs totaled $24,500. So that includes my $23,000 from Smith Construction and $1,500 from payroll. It is not including my $4,000 from We Are Engineers, and that's because this has an expense status of new. So only reviewed expenses come into the payment request. Now here's the other thing that I notice about this now that I see the net total, which is my costs minus my match. My net total is $11,500. If you come back to the example, remember I wanted to request $12,750 in general admin and construction. However, I only have construction showing up here and this net total is too low. That tells me I have a mistake on my expenses. I do not fix it on the payment request. I don't click this edit pencil. I don't click into this additional expenses. What I do is just cancel out this payment request. So I'm not going to create it. Something's wrong. So I'm clicking the cancel button. While that's loading, I see there's a question, are program income expenses included on the reports? They are not included on those canned reports because they are custom fields that DED created. So I'm going to go back to my expense page. I've left it in a tab. If you need to navigate back to it, you would go to financial expenses. So I'm going to go find my mistake. My Smith Construction looks okay. I have $12,500 in cash match, $23,000 on the grant funds. But my April payroll has several mistakes. It's in construction instead of general administration, and it should be $2,500. So to fix that, I'm going to click the edit pencil. And now this is a change. When we had reporting periods, you would have closed these expenses in a reporting period. Then you would have had to contact DED to get that reporting period rejected, and then you could edit your expenses. Now you can do this all on your own without reaching out to DED for assistance. So that should cut some time out of your process. So I can actually just go ahead and make these changes. I want it to be general administration, and this should be $2,500, which if I check my financial tab, now shows $2,000 from the grant and still the $500 in match. That's actually what I want. I've got both of my attachments on there, so I'm going to click Save. So this looks right. I'm going to go back to my payment request screen. I left it in a tab. If you didn't do that, you can go to post award, cash flow, payment requests. I'm going to just click to my tab, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to click the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner to create a new payment request. It's still my second payment request. Still creating it today on May 19th. I'm not using reporting periods anymore. I still have expenses on April 14th and April 29th. So I'm going to include those dates here. Still a reimbursement. Notice as soon as I included those dates, these fields populated. Now I'm seeing what I wanted, $25,500, $13,000 of which is match. So I'm requesting $12,500. That matches my example, which I have a typo in on here. Or I made another mistake on my expense. I did. Sorry about that. I unintentionally made a mistake on the Smith construction, so we can fix that by canceling this again. My match here should actually be $12,250. So there we go. That matches what I actually want to see here. I'm going to save this. Create my payment request again. Select my date range, not using the reporting period. Okay, here we go. Here's the $12,750 that I want to request. Again, notice that it's not pulling in that we are engineers expense. Otherwise, we'd have a total of $29,000. I'm not clicking this edit pencil. If I click it on accident and I get this box, I can just delete it. So then on my payment request, my net total should match my requested amount. So I'm going to type $12,750 in my requested amount. If I want to check on how much funds I have in my award, I can click the remaining grant balance, this green hyperlink, and that's going to pull up a screen. It shows me that I had $100,000, $10,000 have been approved. That leaves me $90,000 available on my award. I'm only requesting $12,000, so I know I'm within my limits here. I can also see how much match I've contributed to date and what's left on my match requirement. The comments here are optional. These would be if you needed to leave a note for DED, a note for yourself, for an audit trail. Not required, but this is a box that maybe could be helpful for you. If you are a program that uses requests for funds form, you would attach it here. And at this point, if you want to just save it, you would click save. If you're ready to submit it to DED, if you want to save it, you click the create button. If you want to submit it to DED, you click submit. So I am ready to submit this. So I'm going to submit it. That emails my program rep at DED. And now that I've done that, so I can see that it's submitted. Here's all my expense amounts. Kind of see a little audit trail. I'm going to navigate back to the expenses to show you what that's done on the expense page. So I click the payment request in the upper right-hand corner. Now I'm going to post award financial expenses. I'm clicking run so I can see everything. So notice that on Smith Construction and April 2022 payroll, I no longer have the edit pencils. I can't change these expenses. I can still look at them, but I can't change anything on them. When DED approves my payment request, their status will change to closed. I still can edit this new expense for We Are Engineers, which is going to be included in my payment request 3. So I'll pause here. This is the end of our in-system demo. Are there any questions? You can use the chat, you can use the QA, you can raise your hand to be unmuted. Okay. Keep thinking of questions if you have any. Okay, I see one question in the chat. And Liz, I'm not sure if I quite understand your question. So if I don't answer what you've asked, please let me know. The question is, if you have an expense that is paid for partially with program, and I think program income, then you would just submit your invoice in 2 different expenses, one using the custom tab and one using the program income tab, and neither would total the amount on the invoice. This is a federal program specific question. So if you don't have a federal grant, this question won't apply to you. That's kind of right. I don't have the program income turned on this award, Liz, but I'll kind of try to walk you through it. There's pictures in your instructions. So this direct cost here is grant funds plus match, not including program income. So I have one invoice including grant funds plus match. I would then have a custom tab on the same expense where I enter in program income. So I have grant funds plus match, grant funds plus match here, one invoice, and then program income would be on this tab. So it's one expense. And the direct cost would be the total on the invoice minus program income or RLS, whichever situation you have. And on a kind of a related topic, we had this question in the last session. If you, and this would apply to state and federal grant programs, if you have an invoice that covers multiple budget categories, so let's look at this We Are Engineers again. If I have an invoice that covers general admin and construction, what I would do in that situation is create 2 expenses. I would create one expense for the construction portion of the invoice and one expense for the general admin portion of the invoice. I would attach the same invoice to both expenses, and I would highlight the construction pieces and subtotal them, and I would highlight the general admin pieces and subtotal them. In all of our programs, if you get to the end of your grant and you have an invoice that is more than the grant funds you have left, you still put it on the expense. The direct cost would still be the total on the invoice. You would just have more match. So the grant funds would be exactly what's left on your grant. The rest of the invoice would be a contribution to match. So you would just be matching more than you required, which is allowed. That's a great thing to do. Are there any other questions? If it's an old program that had everything paid for with advance requests, we need to go back and enter old expenses before we can submit our new expenses. Again, I think this is a CDBG specific question. We had specific training on this a while ago, so I won't go into a ton of detail. But DED is going to help you get caught up on those old advance requests. So essentially, we're going to enter your expenses for you, kind of have you take a look that they're right. But moving forward, you need to, if we're talking about CDBG, you need to use reimbursement requests. And if you have a specific scenario, Liz, you can email ded.support@nebraska.gov, and we can help you kind of talk through that. Good questions. Are there any other ones? While you're still thinking about them, I'll give you a quick recap. The training materials and updated user guides are available on this page, opportunity.nebraska.gov/programs/Amplifund. You can also find the recording up there. Right now, the slides are there. We will have the recording loaded by end of business on Monday. When you're using Amplifund, make sure you're in a supported browser. Looks like we've got another question. If we have multiple general administration invoices paid by one check, do we enter all general administration invoices as one expense? No, you'll have one expense per invoice, and then you would attach the same proof of payment to those individual expenses. So if you have 3 invoices, you'll have 3 expenses, and you'll reattach proof of payment. So quick summary of the changes that have been made. We're not using reporting periods. We're using a date range on the payment request itself to pull in your expenses. That date range pulls in reviewed expenses, and you're going to create one expense per supporting document and proof of payment. If you don't do that, DED will have to reject your payment request and will ask you to fix that. These changes do become effective July 1st, 2022. You are certainly welcome to start using the expense date range immediately. You don't have to wait till July. But if you have some reporting periods already created, you have until July to go ahead and get those submitted and wrapped up. It looks like we have one more question. If you have monthly invoices for general administration or engineering, you submit one for each. Yes, if you have an invoice for general administration and an invoice for engineering, you would have 2 expenses. And if those costs are included on one invoice, you would still have 2 expenses, one for each budget category with the invoice attached to each. I'll wait just a couple minutes here, see if there's another question. If you would like to start using this new way, but you have some expenses closed in a reporting period, go ahead and email ded.support@nebraska.gov and we can get those open for you. If you want to kind of practice with the new way, just let us know. Otherwise, thank you for your time today. Again, resources will be available on this website, and have a good rest of your day.